Hey everybody, hope everyone's having a good Wednesday. We're one day removed from the trade deadline. The Eagles made three big moves, and we're going to discuss those today on a new episode of the No Huddle Show, our Philadelphia Eagles podcast for NJ.com. This is Cayden and Steele, and joining me last night to discuss all these moves was my co-host Bob Brookover. We talk about how these moves could potentially help the Eagles go on another Super Bowl run, how Jaelan Phillips can help the pass rush become way better than it has been this season, maybe even as dominant as it was in previous years at the end of the 2024 season and during the 2022 season. He could be that type of player. We also talk about whether we think Jaire and Alexander and Michael Carter II can really fix this cornerback two situation, provide more flexibility to potentially move Cooper DeJean outside. We break that all down and also go into the second half of the year and kind of preview what we think the Eagles are going to do down the stretch and whether we think they're going to have enough just to go on another Super Bowl run. But first, this episode is brought to you by Penco Tech. With two convenient campuses in Blackwood, New Jersey and in Bristol, Pennsylvania, Penco Tech has provided comprehensive hands-on career training for more than 50 years, featuring programs in HVAC, electrical, plumbing, automotive technology, and more. With dedicated instructors and career placement assistants, Penco Tech can give you the skills and confidence to build a brighter future. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Learn more and take the first step by going to pencotech.edu. All right, Bob, let's get right into it. We're back from the bye, and the Eagles made three moves over the past week. Trade deadline is officially over. Getting Jaelan Phillips from the Miami Dolphins on Monday morning, the edge rusher, for a third-round pick. And then on Saturday night, acquiring Ravens cornerback Jaire Alexander for a late-round pick, the second of two corners they acquired in the last week. First with Michael Carter kicking things off with Howie Roseman's activity over the last week with the trade with the Jets last week, getting the nickel corner. He used to be one of the best slot corners in the NFL a couple of years ago in that trade. Bob, what was your thoughts on Howie Roseman's approach to improving this defense? Obviously, it was an emphasis. The two areas that we've talked about over the last month or even the last 2 months, the concerns at corner and edge rusher. He went out and he addressed those, and he was aggressive and different types of value for each player that he had to give up different types of picks and stuff like that. But what was your thoughts on his just approach?
My thoughts, which I'm gonna kind of write about for Wednesday, were I thought back to the offseason and all the players who were really good at rushing the passer and and covering people who they gave up, who they let go, and we knew they were doing it and why they were doing it, but it left when you lose Milton Williams and you lose Josh Sweat and you lose Brandon Graham to retirement and Bryce Huff to uh, in a trade. And I'm not saying all those players fit or would have been good here, but when you go look at what they're doing with their other teams right now, even a Hassan Reddick who you know moved on is playing okay in Tampa Bay, not great, but okay. But specifically Williams, Josh Sweat, and Bryce Huff is playing very well for San Francisco. For maybe this, who might be the most surprising team in the league, given all their injuries. Um, it made me think about that. And, he's spent pretty much since training camp trying to fill the holes that were left by all those guys leaving. Uh, and we still don't know if he has. I do like the Jaelan Phillips move. This guy who he's got 32 pressures. Um, and that he led Miami in that statistic. I often agree with Vic. I'm not sure defense coordinators mean as much when they say it, but many of them say the same thing that they want guys that can change what the quarterback is doing, affect what the quarterback is doing, and it doesn't necessarily have to come in a sack. And there is truth to that. And J.L. Phillips had 32 pressures this year, four more than anybody on the Eagles, the most on the Dolphins when he was the last time he was healthy. Before that, he had 77, which I think was tied for the seventh in the league. And pressures are really important. I mean, I was looking at some stats today. Um, the Eagles, I think, are one of three teams since 2022, the year they made the Super Bowl. One of three teams that have 300 pressures every year in 22, 23, 24, and they're way down in that department this year. Um, so they definitely need some help there. The Calvary's coming from not just Jaelan Phillips, though. Brandon Graham coming out of retirement. We're going to see him in Green Bay on Monday night, and maybe even bigger than all of them. Although I think Jaelan Phillips is the biggest move, but Nolan Smith coming off IR, possibly. I think he probably is. Watching him on the practice field, looks like he's ready to return. He hasn't played since week 3. Suddenly, you got what looks like a pretty decent pass rush. Jalen Hutton's playing his best football of the season right now. Uh, I think Josh Uche has played beyond expectations, really, with the number of pressures he has, given what he had done in recent years with the Chiefs. With the Patriots. So I think you suddenly do have the makings of a good edge rushing room. As far as the cornerback part of it, I want to see what they're going to do there first. You know, it, I'm going to be surprised if it doesn't end up being Cooper DeJean ended up being on the outside more with Michael Carter moving inside and seeing what they can do with that. That would be my first option in this scenario. But they've certainly given themselves the flexibility to look at a lot of different things here. It doesn't all have to happen in Week 9 against the Packers, but they've given themselves the flexibility to look at some things. But they've all, and CJ Gardner Johnson, obviously, you're going to go back to the last year a second, hasn't had that year that he had last year, as in fact is kind of fighting for his NFL life, and Darius Slay hasn't been as good. But you can say that, but you can also say that they're not as good at safety as they were, or cornerback as they were with those two guys last year. And the object is to replace them and get better. Um, we'll see. We'll see what happens in those spots. But I am encouraged by what they've done at edge rusher. I'm in the wait and see mode at cornerback.
That's where I'm at as well. I watched last night's Cardinals Cowboys game though, Bob, and I had the same thought that I think you were alluding to. Josh Sweat looks pretty darn good. He's building off what he did at the end of last year, and he continues to be a really underrated pass rusher. And they have been able to replace his production in part, because Nolan Smith got hurt, so we haven't really seen him play, over the last 5 weeks, and we don't know what he's going to be in his third season. But they needed to make a move, even with Jalen Hunt coming on over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And like you said, Josh Uche's played well, and even if Brandon Graham gives them a handful of snaps, they needed someone else to take that unit to the next level and really potentially cover up for some holes at corner, because I don't know if they're going to be any good at corner still with those moves. We'll see. But Jaelan Phillips could be that type of player in 2023. He looked like one of the best young pass rushers in the league before he suffered that Achilles injury, and then he had the ACL the following year. But the most important part, or of recent events, just kind of what's happened with Jaelan Phillips, is that since week 5, he's been third in the league in highest pressure rate in the NFL, according to Next Gen Stats. Before that, the first 4 weeks, he wasn't generating as much pressure. So it seems like a player that's starting to figure it out over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, which makes you think that maybe he's starting to feel healthy, like his old self again. If they can get like 2023 Jaelan Phillips or 2022 Jaelan Phillips, that player that was ascending, and if he can turn it on for the rest of the year and be a legitimate number one edge rusher, which I think he has the talent to do, it really changes the complexion of the defense and get more pressure. You can cover up some more of those holes at corner. Um, Obviously, the familiarity with Vic Fangio helps, and the fact that Vic, even though he'll downplay, and High Roseman kind of joked about today when he was asked about, Vic Fangio said his input on trades is minuscule, but obviously this is a guy that Vic was comfortable with, who wanted to coach again. I'm curious to hear his thoughts on Jaelan Phillips. But another thing about Jaelan Phillips is his versatility. He doesn't just line up and beat you on the outside shoulder of the tackle. He also kicks inside on pass rush downs. kind of, what Zadarius Smith could do a little bit before he retired, kind of what Brandon Graham's been able to do throughout his career. So it's a skill set that they value in this defense, and he can do it at an extremely high level. So I think it's a great trade. Obviously, there's the injury concerns. The more interesting factor, another interesting factor to me, Bob, is that he's on the final year of his deal. They gave up that third round pick for him. He's only 26. And look, I mentioned the injury history, and that is a red flag. But when he's been healthy, he's been one of the more young, productive young pass rushers in the NFL. Do you vision him as a long term piece for the Eagles? Do you think that was a part of the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a possibility. Howie kind of didn't answer that question today when he was asked it. Basically said we'll see with these guys. We don't want to have anybody think we're playing favorites here, so it's they're in a wait and see mode in that. Um, but I do like the fact he's playing for a contract. A couple things I like about it that probably won't get talked about much. A, he's playing for a contract, and um, I do believe there's some motivation for guys playing for a contract to be set for life. So that part is true for him. Also, uh, you know, I, come on, man, you have to be thrilled to go from the Miami Dolphins right now to the Philadelphia Eagles, and then and have this chance that just didn't exist when you were in Miami to win a Super Bowl. And then I think go inside the locker room to the other players. Having covered professional sports for 40 years, there's nothing like uh, veteran players, and it was more so in baseball than in football because football players don't last as long as baseball players. But it's true in football too. Uh, they want nothing more than to see that my front office is giving me a chance to finish what we've started. The Eagles are 6-2. Players are just like us. They know what's needed in that locker room. They see it all the time. We saw it on the Super Bowl highlights, which is one of the great things about the Super Bowl is you can everybody. It seems like everybody's mic'd up, and you saw Jalen Hurts go to Saquon Barkley and say, "No, you were it. You were what we needed. You were the piece we needed." Uh, I'm not saying that Jaelan Phillips is that level piece needed, but players know they know edge rusher is what is needed there. They know they needed help at cornerback. I just have to think that that's going to create a atmosphere in that locker room for the last 9 weeks that is contagious, and let's go win another one. I think those things exist, the contract thing, and I think it's very real. It's hard to define, but I think it's very real.
Yeah, and he's in a good position to potentially get a contract. You look at the decisions that they're going to have to make in the offseason with some of their upcoming free agents, like Kobe Dean. That decision will be interesting because of the Jahad Campbell factor. Do they feel it's vital to bring him back? Obviously, he's played very well since he's been back, and you could argue,
I'll answer that one now. No.
yeah, yeah, no, probably not. So, and then Dallas Goddard, they didn't give him a contract before the season. I know he's, he's been a really good player in the red zone this year, at 7 touchdowns, and he's still one of the better tight ends in the NFL. But I don't know if they bring him back. So if you look at a player that they might prioritize of their returning free agents in a position that they still have a need for, and players they don't have locked up at that position. They don't have Nolan Smith on their contract yet. They have J.L.X. Hunt, Josh Uche will be a free agent, Brandon Graham maybe will retire officially after this year. So they don't have any long term options invested at that position yet. And he's in a great position. Another thing is, I mean, you talked about pressures, and that's they matter the most, but also pass rush win rate, I think is just as valuable. It shows you how much you're winning cleanly. According to PFF, he's 19.3%, which would be the most of any Eagles defensive lineman this year of among their edge rushers. Obviously, Nolan Smith hasn't played more than 3 games, but he would rank number one. He would rank number one in pressure percentage as well with 18.1%. So he comes in and he's arguably the Eagles' best edge rusher. He's arguably better than Nolan Smith, who, yes, he played great second half of last year and then was dominant in the playoffs and had that really good run, but he's their most established edge rusher, and he could be their best one. And he's only 26 years old. So could be a great trade for the Eagles as long as he stays healthy. The other two are more dart throws. Jaire Alexander, who got benched by the Ravens at the beginning of the season or really never got into the lineup, really. Just hasn't played many snaps. And when he has played, he's been really rough. He got picked apart in that week 1 game against the Bills. And then Michael Carter, who got replaced by Jarvis Brownlee with the Jets at nickel. So both guys who kind of lost their jobs with their respective former teams, and once were really great players. Especially Jaire Alexander was one of the better corners in the league, but Michael Carter as well was a really good nickel. As High Richmond said, he's played at elite level before. So you're taking two dart throws at corner with guys who aren't playing well, who needed a change of scenery. What one do you think has the best chance, Bob, of maybe finding their footing with the Eagles? And I'm not saying they're going to be as good as they used to be, but kind of finding their former self a little bit. If you had to take a bet on, Jair Alexander or Michael Carter.
Probably Carter because he's played more this year.
Yeah.
I think he started 4 games, played 5 games. So he's just played more. Yeah, that for that reason more than anything else, it concerns me that Jaire went to Baltimore and just couldn't even get on the field. It's one thing to lose your job, especially, uh, you know, it's interesting because both places are, uh, Baltimore is a great franchise, but obviously struggling this year, kind of coming on, probably going to still, I think they're still going to win that division, but the Jets, you know, again, I'm going to just go back to what I just said about Phillips. You just left the Jets for the Eagles, and you're going to have a chance to be a difference maker on a team. Again, how uplifting must that be for a player? So if he has something left in the tank, and he's young enough that he should, this should be a great move for him and a great opportunity. Um, I'm not sure the Eagles wouldn't rather have it be the other way, where Jaire Alexander comes in and nails down that other outside corner spot, and it allows them to use Cooper DeJean the way they know he's a superstar in that role. But if I had a gun to my head, I'd probably say more confidence in Michael Carter uh, being the guy.
Yeah. And ideally, I think what you just said is fair. They would rather have Jair win the outside job and maybe get back to like half of what he was, or a little more than half. Maybe not, the All Pro version that we've seen in past years when he's been healthy. But if that happens, then you can have Jair on the outside. You don't have to move Cooper. And then Michael Carter, Howie Roseman brought up his versatility to play safety. He has played safety early in his career. He has been one of the better nickels in the NFL. So you have a good dime defensive back. If you want to play more dime packages, you have a fourth defensive back that you can really trust. Um, and he can also play safety in a pinch. And maybe if Makuba struggles in the second half of the year and he doesn't really turn a corner, you have an emergency option there that can play some snaps. Or if injuries happen at that position, because you're kind of limited on depth now with Marcus Epps. So that would be the ideal scenarios, that you have a really versatile defensive back that can play a role, maybe almost similar to like what Avonte Maddox kind of could do at times, playing nickel and safety. And then you have Jair solve the outside problem. But I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in Jair solving the outside problem. Like you said, he couldn't get on the field in Baltimore. Um, he's and it's just the injuries. I don't know if he can rejuvenate here, because I just don't know if it's, was it a bad scheme fit in Baltimore, or is it just the fact that his body is broken down? I mean, he's just missed so many games throughout his career. Missed 9 games in 2024, or more than 9 games. Missed 11 games last year. He missed 6 games in 2023. He missed 13 games in 2021. So as good as he's been when he's been on the field, he's rarely been on the field, the last 4 years. So I just don't know if he's going to provide anything better than what Dory Jackson has provided for you. And he's in concussion protocol, or was, and we'll see what happens with him and Keely Ringo. And um, I don't know. By going back to what you said, maybe it is time for Cooper DeJean. Do you think there's a chance that he is just the full time outside guy? You mentioned that you think there's a chance that he could play snaps there. Are they going to get to the point where it's the end of the year and they have no choice?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it could very much get to that. I mean, I'm gonna. Unfortunately, this isn't like training camp, but you can um, gather some things watching individual drills. Although they've been giving us less and less access to watch anything during practice, but if this were training camp, we'd be able to see exactly what they want to do and exactly what Vic wants to do. But it's going to be interesting to see. Uh, yeah, it seems like we look every week in warm ups to see who's at the other outside cornerback spot. Um, you know, and you know now we're going to have to continue to do that to see who's lined up where. Um, I really I don't know for sure how he's going to come out of all this. I really don't. Jacorian Bennett is still there, but obviously he wasn't ready to play last week or last game against the Giants. Um, so I don't know what they think of him when he's healthy. I think we may have seen the last of probably have seen the last of Adoree Jackson and Keely Ringo, at least on defense. Keely will probably continue to, yeah, have a spot on special teams because he's very good on special teams. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in these during practice and in Green Bay on Monday.
Yeah. And now we go to the second half of the year, about to begin. They play the Green Bay Packers on Monday night. But first, just a little recap of what's happened over the last couple of weeks. The Eagles figure things out. They won a game on the road against Minnesota. The passing game really got going, starting against Minnesota. And it only improved against the Giants, and it looked even more crisp, even with you know AJ Brown um, banged up and not being able to play in that game. It still looked really good against the Giants. Kevin Patullo seems to be getting more comfortable as a play caller. The run game finally broke out with Saquon Barkley, but not only Saquon Barkley, Tank Bigsby as well, looking like a legitimate threat as an RB2. The offensive line had their best game of the season, at least run blocking wise, and that was without center Cam Jurgens, who was dealing with a knee injury. But Brett Toth came in and played really well. The defense continues to show improvements, especially with Nakobe Dean in the lineup. You can tell he's making an impact. Um, Now we go to the second half of the year, starting with Green Bay on Monday, and then they play Detroit the following week on Sunday night, and then they finish out the month with the Cowboys and Bears. The Eagles are at the top of the NFC right now, with but there are other teams in the mix like Seattle, Detroit, um, the Rams, Green Bay still, who they play on Monday. Bob, what's your expectations for the second half of the year with this team? What are some of the things that you're most looking forward to as we return from the bye? Um, as we get into, as we talked about last time, the meat of the season, where the Eagles have one NFC East, I should probably address that, is probably over. I don't want to say over because you never know what will happen, but Dallas got destroyed, beaten up pretty bad by the Cardinals on Monday night in a loss. I know they acquired Quentin Williams today in a big trade, but it'd probably be hard for them to catch up. Washington got blown out by Seattle on Sunday night, and they lost Jaden Daniels for at least a decent amount of time. No timeline really has been given for his return or whether he's even going to return for the rest of this year. And the Giants have completely fallen apart after showing some promise after beating the Eagles 3 weeks ago. What are you looking forward to as the Eagles fight for a one seed and potentially clinch the NFC East?
No, they just had the greatest bye week ever.
Yes.
Uh, they, they every team in their division lost. Um, Washington lost its quarterback. The teams they're fighting for the top seed lost. Green Bay and Detroit. The NFC West is all of a sudden beginning to look like a very good and tough division. Maybe team that to beat for them is going to come out of that conference, but it probably helps them in the regard that those teams have to all play each other and could beat each other up in terms of home field advantage. Um, so we'll see what happens there. But again, yeah, it's probably premature to say the Eagles have wrapped up the NFC East, but it would be a choke job on the 2023 level Eagles to not win this division now. They managed to not do it in 2023 somehow, falling apart. And this, I just don't see that happening to this team because they're just a bit more mature. Yeah, the meat of the schedule it has arrived, and at Green Bay is going to be a tough game, especially with the Packers just losing to the Panthers at home. I'm sure they're going to um, want to get back on the field and play better football, but I'm just not sure that the Packers are a great team. And let's not fail to mention that Nick Sirianni has never lost after a bye week. Usually pretty good at getting his team together after a bye week. In fact, Hall of Fame good last year with what they did after the bye. Then they play the Lions at home. I still think the Lions are very good, although I watched that whole Minnesota Detroit game. They have some flaws too. But now all of a sudden, if you looked at the schedule beyond those two games, so even let's say the Eagles go 6-4, uh, then they go to Dallas. I don't see them losing to the Cowboys. I really don't. Play the Bears at home. I don't see them losing that game. The Chargers are now without both their tackles with Joe Alt getting hurt last week. Don't see them losing that one. Don't see them losing to the Raiders at home. Don't see them losing to the Commanders. I mean, after these two games, the only game I see them even possibly losing is at Buffalo. I really do. And if that's the case, then you're looking at least at a 12-5 record, probably better chance at 13-4. And would that be good enough to get them the top seed in the NFC? Probably. Um, so I mean, I took a long look ahead there, but it sure looks promising right now, especially when you consider that they got the running game going. Jalen Hurts is playing his best football. Um, you know, the path to repeating as a Super Bowl champion suddenly looks very real to me for the Eagles. It really does.
Yeah, and it does because a lot of these NFC teams, are close in record. You mentioned the Lions, and I still think the Lions are a good team as well, but there's been some inconsistencies on defense. They lost at home against J.J. McCarthy, who was making his first start since week 2. So I think there is some concern with Detroit. I still believe in that offense with Jared Goff and Jameer Gibbs and Amon St. Brown and Sam Laporta at tight end. Man, they have so many weapons. They have a good quarterback, and they have a pretty steady offensive line still. So they're a real threat. I said they were the biggest threat coming into the year for the Eagles and not the Packers. And I don't think it's the Packers after watching on Sunday watching them lose to the Carolina. And we'll get into that game specifically in a moment, but I don't think it's going to be Green Bay, especially after they lost tight end Tucker Kraft for the season with a torn ACL. And I just don't think they have enough on offense without Tucker Kraft at the skill position. They didn't acquire anyone on Tuesday's trade deadline to help tight end or to help get another wide receiver. Matthew Golden's banged up right now. I just don't see Green Bay being the team that threatens the Eagles. And if it's not going to be Detroit as the top team, Bob, like you said, I think it's time for people to look at the NFC West as potentially the biggest threat to the Eagles, whether that's the Rams or Seahawks. So those are the two teams that are playing the best football, arguably in the NFL right now. Um, probably even better than the Eagles. I know strength of schedule for Seattle hasn't been as impressive, but I mean Sam Darnold's playing great and their defense is awesome. We've seen Jackson Smith Njigba, just make plays after plays at wide receiver. And they got Rashid Shaheed today, so Seattle could be a real challenge. But saying all that, the Eagles are still the most talented team in the NFC, and like you said, the schedule they can get past Green Bay and get past Detroit. it could be smooth sailing here, and it could be a home playoff game and a bye at Lincoln Financial Field, and it could run through Philadelphia again. And if it runs through Philadelphia, I have a hard time seeing them losing in the playoffs, especially with just the amount of talent they have, the experience that most of these players who are returning have in the situation, going on a run before. It could be magical for the Eagles, but first they still have to do it. It's it's not as easy as it may look, and they got to play Green Bay, who are going to be hungry after getting embarrassed by Carolina. I know Carolina's a little more respectable than past years. They have a 5-4 record, but Bob, Rico Dowdle ran all over Green Bay's defense, and they went into Lambeau, which is not supposed to happen, and they beat a team that has a lot more talent than they do. And Green Bay just showed up flat, and they looked pretty bad in that game. What's your take on this Monday night game against Green Bay? Everyone before the year is hyping this up as Green Bay is the best team in the NFC besides the Eagles, and this is going to be the real test. Do you still see it that way at all, or?
I think it's still a test. Yeah, I think anytime you have to go into Lambeau Field, the Packers are certainly a talented team, but they've uh, just run the ball okay so far this season. Jordan Love has has played well at times, but not great at other times, and certainly not great uh, in this game against Carolina. Um, it'll be interesting to see if the Packers bounce back because they're not having a fun week of practice this week. They do still have a lot of talent. It's becoming almost a must-win game for them, given what lies ahead uh, beyond this week. With For the Packers, you look at their schedule. They have two Detroits left. I think they got Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
No, they played them opening day. I'm sorry, they did play them open. They beat them opening day, but they have to play at Detroit still. Um, they have to play at Denver still, and at Minnesota. Not easy games. They play Minnesota twice, and um, who knows what the Vikings are now that they have a quarterback. We know they have a lot of talent. Um, but with Carson Wentz, it just wasn't working. So it'll be interesting to see what the Vikings are. They were obviously a really good team last year. So I don't think the Packers can afford to lose this game, but they they might not be able to avoid that.
No, no. And if Rico Dowdle could run for 130 and 2 touchdowns and 5.2 yards per carry, and look, Rico Dowdle's been an awesome story this year. He's been, ran right through the Dolphins defense earlier this year, a couple weeks back, and he's been fantastic. He's become RB1 in Carolina's backfield, and you could argue, he's a really good starter. I mean, he's come out of nowhere. He's got 735 yards in total this season. So he's a respectable player, but he's still not Saquon Barkley. And Carolina does not have the offensive line that the Eagles have. Even when the Eagles are banged up, the Eagles, still have more talent on offensive line than Carolina. So if the Eagles can translate what they did against the Giants and run the ball again, they could have some success running the ball against Green Bay's defense. Green Bay has a good secondary or has some good pieces in their secondary, but there's matchups on the outside with Devontae Smith and AJ Brown if he returns for this game that I do like. And then looking at Green Bay's offense, I'm worried that for them they won't have enough without Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft was arguably the best tight end in football this season. He was Jordan Love's go-to target. Now Jordan Love is going to have to rely on Luke Musgrave and Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs and Savion Williams, guys of that nature. And like you mentioned earlier, Bob, I mean, Jordan Love hasn't exactly been the most consistent quarterback in the NFL this year or just generally throughout his career. So I'm looking at this matchup and I'm thinking the Eagles are going to win this game. I think this could be a statement win for the Eagles. Yes, they beat the doors off the Giants and they beat Minnesota the week before, controlled a large portion of that game, and but this could be the statement where they go out, they beat everyone's preseason Super Bowl favorite after they got Micah Parsons, and they could go into Green Bay and they could run at Micah Parsons, which they've done in past years. Micah Parsons is a great pass rusher, but they've neutralized him in the past when he played with the Cowboys. with Lane Johnson and them being able to run the ball. And I think it could be the same story. I think this could be the game where everyone realizes, after those 2 weeks early in the year with the loss to Denver and the Giants with the Eagles, where they seemed like they were reeling, like this Eagles team is back, and not only back, that they're ready for going on another Super Bowl run, and that they should be the far and away favorite in the NFC. And I think they could do that against Green Bay, because I just don't believe in Green Bay fully. Are you expecting a win right now for the Eagles? Like, I know we have a longer week now, we have more time, but like, I really do feel like this is the game the Eagles are gonna make a statement to the rest of the NFL.
I do think they win. They'll win, and they'll score at least one tush push touchdown against the
Yeah.
Packers. That's a must. That's a must do. Must has to be on their must do list. We have to score at least one tush push touchdown against the Packers before they outlaw it after next season.
They should have a whole drive of tush pushes every play. Is it? They can't do that, but I mean that would be funny to see them score multiple touchdowns off of that. Before we wrap up today, Bob, I just want to, if you have any other final thoughts as we get the second half of the year. I mean, we just talked about the schedule doesn't look too difficult. What are the things that, or just the things that you have on your mind as we get ready for this game and as we get ready just for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I'm just ready to get going here, get the second half going. I'm eager to see Jalen Hurts play again. He's played maybe two of his best games of his life in the last two games. His passer ratings is like 151.2 in his last two games. He's thrown seven touchdowns. You know, there's some minor gathering steam for him in the MVP vote. Uh, he's 15 touchdowns and one interception. The other numbers aren't really there um, in terms of passing yards, and he's actually rushed for fewer yards in recent weeks. Uh, but he's what's he got now? 10, 20 touchdowns, 4, 5, yeah, 20 touchdowns. Uh, I think one turnover for the season, maybe two, I guess. One interception, and I think he lost a fumble in one of those games at home. Maybe against it might have been against the
Yeah,
Rams.
yeah, yeah.
But he's, you know, 20 touchdowns, two turnovers. Uh, I think, if he keeps playing the way he's played in the last 2 weeks, he's going to end up being in that conversation. So,
Yeah, and I think he deserves to be in that conversation with how he's played for the majority of the season. I still feel like he gets knocked for certain things that other quarterbacks don't get knocked for. He's been playing really well. He was awesome in the Giants and Vikings games, and I'm excited to see him build that off that as well. I have so much higher expectations for this offense in the second half of the year. I thought they looked more creative the past few weeks. I'm curious to talk to Kevin Patullo again when we get to talk to him this week. He seems like he's starting to settle down, and I think they have. And maybe this is a little irrational, but I think they've unlocked a new dimension to their run game. Look, they got to conserve Saquon Barkley a little bit. Saquon Barkley was great in that game. Got banged up a little bit at the end with the quad, but Tank Bigsby looks legit. And if they can get another running back that could take some of that pressure off Saquon, but also just add a different dimension and just give fresh legs to that rotation. It makes the Eagles even more dangerous. I thought Landon Dickerson, when rewatching the game, played fantastic next to Brett Toth. It looks like he's starting to feel healthy. You hope Cam Jurgens, or they hope Cam Jurgens probably gets back and can get healthy at some point, and they can reestablish that dominance in the interior. Because if they do, then the run game will really get going, and then they have another guy potentially Tank Bigsby. So the offense has a lot of potential. The passing game, I'm curious to see if it can get even more consistent. Can they build off of that? Can Devontae Smith continue to play the way that he is? He looks even better as a route runner. To me, he even looks more explosive this year. Then you're going to get AJ Brown back, and already mentioned Dallas Goedert having a really good year earlier. So high expectations for this offense. Really, it's just the defense. Can they piece it together at corner enough where it's not a problem in the playoffs and down the stretch? And can Jaelan Phillips, potentially transform the edge rush room. But it's a really good team, and I'm sure Bob that we'll be covering them, into January, potentially even February this year, and it's gonna be fascinating to watch. But thanks for everyone for tuning in for another episode today of the No Huddle Show. We always appreciate you guys coming back to listen. We appreciate if you're a first time listener. Make sure you come back and continue to follow up for our coverage. We're also going to have a ton of written content this week as we preview this Eagles Packers game. So make sure to go to NJ.com's website or go to the mobile app and download and make sure that you read our written content. Thank you very much, and everyone have a good day.